Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Captive Audience. It's Wonderful Wednesday once again, and it's your host, Don Anderson, with the co host, Leslie Schneider. Say good evening, Leslie.
Hello, everyone.
We're so glad that you all are here. As usual, feel free to give us your chats. Let us know you're out there, and we're going to bounce around a whole bunch of ideas. Again, it's another one of those exciting days. It seems like there's never an unexciting day. And this one certainly is yet another one where we have events to definitely talk about. But before jumping into the events of the day, I thought I would start with a little monologue, if you'll bear with me, just to call it like a 3-minute monologue that I think are some useful thoughts I'd like to share with you all as members of the audience. And let me start with this. Essentially, we're in a war of ideas, and every one of us are warriors. You, me, all of us. We don't wear a uniform, but we're warriors. And when you look at a podcast like this, you should think of it as a place where you either acquire ideological weapons or you sharpen the ones you already have so that you can go into combat with your fellow citizens and be able to sell them on the ideas that'll make the country better. So if you haven't done this in the past, I tried to do this with any of the podcasts I listen to. Get a pen, write down ideas that'll help you in the one-on-one discussions that you have during the day. Your verbal battles are just as important as any military engagement that we've ever been in. So definitely do that. So here's a question for you all. Do you ever wonder why nation building doesn't work? I think to understand why nation building doesn't work, you first have to look at why America does work. And here's 3 principles I think that are top of mind. I know for me, I articulate this with people when I talk to them. We have 3 things that make this unique and different and better than any other country that's ever existed in history. First, it's a constitutional republic, U.S. Constitution, Thomas Jefferson being the author. We have free market economics, Adam Smith, he was written The Wealth of Nation. That's the second piece. And the third piece is we have a moral code, Judeo-Christianity, and this is set forth in the Bible, if you will. But of those 3 principles, the most important one is the moral code. And we take this totally for granted. So let me give you some ideas around that moral code and how it works just on a regular basis. We take for granted that people pay their rent and that people pay their mortgages. We take for granted that people won't steal in a retail store. We take for granted that your neighbor won't eat your cats and dogs. We laugh about that, right? But that's not true everywhere. We take for granted that when you apply for a job, there's reasonable competition for the job and that it will be merit-based. Those things basically flow from adherence to the moral code, and they simply don't exist in other parts of the world. We take that totally for granted. The constitutional republic and the free market economics won't work if you don't have a moral code underlying all of that. And to give you a couple of examples, India is what I'll call a semi-functional democracy. The reason it's not working as well as it could is because it's hamstrung by the fact that you only get hired if you're related to somebody in a clan. And this is true of the government as well. For that reason, India will never see its potential because of its lack of adherence to a moral code. The reason we have a flourishing economy is because people generally, they pay the rent, they pay the mortgage, they don't steal at the retail store. Retail store pilferage, if it's greater than 3%, that's considered too high. That means 97% of the time, people are buying stuff without stealing. The vast majority of people pay their rent and their mortgage on time. You always hear the crazy stories of somebody who didn't pay their rent or the evil landlord or somebody didn't pay the mortgage, but those are exceptions, not the rule, which means when nobody's around and not looking, people are doing the right thing when nobody's looking. That's because they're adhering, whether they're a Christian or not, they're adhering to the moral code. All business deals are still basically a handshake proposition. You can have all the contracts in the world. If you decide not to pay that mortgage, you can go 5 or 6 months before they kick you out, right? And live for free. Why don't you do that? Because generally speaking, you're adhering to a moral code. And the credit score, for example, is simply a measure of integrity. That's all it is. All the credit score does is measure the likelihood that you'll keep your promise. And keeping your promise is about morality. So this simply isn't true in much of the rest of the world. You must have basic integrity for the constitutional republic and free markets to work. That's why these other countries don't work and will never catch up. You think of Mexico, Russia, China, bribery is the norm. Lack of integrity due to lack of adherence to a moral code may be the key reasons why they lag the United States. And let me close with this. This is why unrestricted immigration from non-Western countries can't work, because they don't share the moral code that we share, and it's very difficult for them to assimilate as a result. And this is one of the reasons why unrestricted immigration is one of the worst things that can happen to a country. So there's my opening monologue. I hope you all found that interesting. Let me stop there. And your thoughts. Any thoughts on that, Leslie?
Oh, I mean, I 100% agree with you. That it used to be that when people immigrated, they were assimilating. That was the first thing that they wanted do. I mean, first of all, you had to prove that you were going to be self-sufficient, or you had somebody that was going to provide for you and, enable you to be a contributing member of the society, or at least not a taker of the society. And for some reason, that's been considered, too harsh, and we need to be more compassionate. And so we need to give, 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 give. And so while we're giving of all of our resources from those who we're giving to those takers, and then restricting access to those who are actually giving, it's degrading our culture. You're absolutely right. I mean, we talked about this last time, how, it not only degrades our culture, but it actually victimizes those very people who are coming over and trying to be part of our society. If they don't learn our language, if they don't assimilate into our culture, then they can't access all the freedoms and the opportunities that America provides. And that creates kind of a second class or even a third class within our own country because they're cut off. And it's unfortunate. So, yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, which is exactly the goal of the left. Let's face it, their objective is to get them dependent on the government, because if they're dependent on the government, then that's free votes for them. And that's precisely why California, for example, has gone from a two-party state to a one-party state over the last 25 years because of this massive unrestricted education. Same thing is true of Oregon and Washington, although less due to illegal immigration in those two states and more due to basically mail-in voting has pretty much led to that. And now the illegal immigration is proving to be a big factor with that as well. But that's how the left gets power. They can't sell their ideas, so they have to recruit people that they think will vote for them. And that's what they're doing.
Yeah, it's really a corruption of the process. Like you said, the only way they can win is if they lie and if they cheat. And so let's dumb down our educational system. Let's, put people in power, the teachers union, who will, advocate for this and actually execute on this. And then let's, form relationships with the politicians who will fund this and who will mandate this. Right. So that's how the education system gets dumbed down. And then, unchecked immigration. Again, it comes back to, we need to be more compassionate. And then, not cleaning up the voter rolls. Again, it's laziness. It's also intentional. It's this fake sales pitch about how, you're not compassionate. You can't require that people, show ID because, there are people that, can't possibly afford ID, but, nobody's, advocating for them to buy beer without showing an
Right. No, it's incredible.
Without showing an idea. Like, everybody's okay with that stuff. But when it comes to like the basic building blocks of our country, those are the things that we're compromising.
Absolutely. And you can't get, this is the other thing. They think you can give somebody self-esteem. You can't give self-esteem. You can't buy self-esteem. Self-esteem is something you have to earn. If you look at things like, I think sports is like a great place to because things are very measurable in the sporting field. And nobody gives you a starting position, or if we use music, nobody gives you first chair if you're playing clarinet or something, right? You don't just give that. You have to earn that. And in the course of earning that, in the course of putting in the hours of practice necessary to earn that first chair, you get self-esteem because you've improved yourself. Right. And nothing is better for a human being than that. You take that away from a human being and you destroy them. And that's what the left does. And of course, with the objective being to make them dependent on the government.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy. I'm born and raised San Diego, California. And, my little town used to be, pretty groovy and crunchy. And, but we were a Republican state all during the time. I mean, it was armpit hair and braids and, hookah lounges. And, we were Republican, because it was about freedom. Who cares? Right. You do you, I'll do me. But then when they flipped it, when it was like, oh, no. Now I'm going to do you. I'm going to get into your business. I'm going to spend your money. I'm going to require this and demand this. And, it's just like, I can remember during COVID, I went into Jimbo's Naturally, which is, health food store. And I was not wearing a mask, and I was approached and, provided with a mask. And I was like, you guys used to be like the rebels. You guys used to be the ones who pushed up against authority. You challenged, the pharmaceutical industry and government and authoritarian control like that.
Hmm.
That's what I grew up with, right? It was
Yeah.
like, show me the facts, ma'am,
Mhm.
and yeah, it's just turned upside down. Like, but again, like the Dems have co-opted that message.
Mhm.
They've made it sound really great. They
Mhm.
made it sound compassionate and
Mhm.
kind and equitable, and none of those are really none of that's true, and none of that really truly speaks to freedom, and that's what we have to protect. We need to protect the the integrity of our country and the foundation that our country is built on, and then we need to protect our freedoms. And the more that we bring in people that are not, that come from these different cultures, that we're degrading our freedoms.
Yeah, we're degrading our freedoms, and the other side of this too is, in the case of Mexico, I'll use that as an example. We're helping them to destroy their own country because we're basically allowing Mexico to offload its problems onto us, which keeps a government in power that doesn't have to try to fix itself. So
Right.
they have a rotten country that survives because basically some of their best and brightest come here and then send the money back over there that they then tax to keep themselves in power.
Right.
It's like the craziest thing ever. So we're not helping Mexico by allowing them to offload their problems onto us.
Right.
Uh,
I actually was in a conversation with a former school board member down in, was it Imperial Beach? Uh,
mhm,
or I think it was Imperial Beach, and she's an immigration attorney.
mhm,
I don't know if I could say her name, but anyway, she was a public figure at the time. Like I said, immigration attorney, Hispanic woman. She came to
mhm,
America legally. It took
mhm,
her and her family a long time. They had to, they applied, then they had to go back into Mexico, and then they came back, and then they immigrated legally. And I'm not saying the process is easy or straightforward or fair,
mhm.
but
Sure.
however, they got it done. And she gave a speech where she said that basically Mexico is dumping their trash into our country,
Yeah.
and we're here we are supposed to be a place that that attracts people who are upwardly mobile, who are aspirational, who are
Mhm,
entrepreneurs, who are hard workers and are going to better the environment that they're put into. And she was saying the same thing that you just said about Mexico, that they're dumping their trash, their low skilled,
mhm,
low aspiration community of people. And so then they're left with the highly skilled, the educated, the tax paying, the high bracket taxpayers.
mhm.
And so they're not really accountable. They don't have to solve any problems. They don't have to provide great schools because all these families are going to cross the border and come to our schools, or they're going to send them to private schools.
Mhm.
They don't really have to provide law and order because they just pay people off, or the gangs run things. I
Mhm.
mean, there's just people people who have means have a lot to lose, so they're
Right.
not going
Mhm.
they're not going to do anything
Right.
to
Mhm.
shake things up.
Mhm.
um
Well, it works well for them, unfortunately, and this goes back to that moral code thing. If you are comfortable because I got mine, if you will, and you see that with the bicoastal elites in this country. And I'll use a blatant example. You think of Palo, if you know anything about Palo Alto. So Palo Alto, California, you have the west side of literally the railroad tracks where Stanford University is and all that good stuff. And as soon as you cross the tracks into East Palo Alto, let's just say that after dark, you probably don't want to be over there. So the people in West Palo Alto are perfectly comfortable. I got mine. My life is great. As long as you keep that over there, we're fine with it. And is that any way for a country to, we did not want to have a country that looked like that. But that's what we are starting to have here. If you think about Mexico, people literally live behind walls in that country.
right.
Um, just like Colombia, those countries are already like that. If we continue down this path, we're going to, and South Africa is another one. You eventually reach the point where you have two countries, and you have no middle class. Again, I think that's the objective of the radical left at the top of the hierarchy in terms of what they're strategically trying to do to us. So,
Yeah.
um, but we got to be firm and we got to say these things that are hard to hear. One of the most deadly things for us, people like us, is we allow our kindness to be weaponized against us, and we can't do that anymore. We're at war. We have to recognize it, and right now it's a verbal war. And if we're going to keep it from being a something more than a verbal war, we got to attack it verbally now.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. It's funny that you say that. I actually lost a friend 2 weeks ago who over an issue that I shared my opinion on an issue, and she said, "I'm not interested in hearing that opinion, and we can only be friends if you no longer voice your opinions."
And see, here's the thing with that. You can't share ideas and not offend people. That's impossible. We all had to be mature enough to realize that we're going to say things that other people are going to disagree with, and we have to be mature enough to hear that and then weigh whether their ideas have merit. And as long as you give evidence-based reasoning supporting your ideas, I think you share them. Now, recognize that not all your ideas are going to be accepted. I know nobody's going to be 100%. You and I aren't going to be 100%, right? We're never going to be 100%. But can we have enough of a degree of agreement that we can move forward? And the whole thing, and this goes back to this whole immigration thing, if the moral code that people share is too far different, it will not work. Just like you look at Israel, their enemies are enemies that have told them, we don't want you to exist anymore. There's no room for negotiation there. You look at the type of immigration that Europe is facing right now. That culture will not work. Those cultures can't merge. It will not work. And because Islam doesn't mix with Judeo Christianity, it just doesn't. And it doesn't mix with freedom because those are religions that demand to run the government. They can't coexist. Um, and so those are the kinds of things you have to reckon. Be realistic and hard headed about it, and recognize that there are some cultures that just aren't going to mix. That's why we have countries in the first place, because we have a shared set of ideas around who we are. And to expect something different is to be unrealistic and inhuman. Basically, it's not how human beings work.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, right. What are the moral, certainties that your community, your culture is based on, and then how tightly do you adhere to that, or how
Mhm,
strongly you adhere to that? I mean, those
mhm,
those are the questions that we need to ask when we're adding people to the mix here in
mhm,
America, or when we're evaluating, who we can trust, globally.
mhm,
Um, there's a there's a lot of strange conversations going on globally. I mean, you mentioned Israel and you know Palestine, and or you made reference to it. And what I've noticed is that over the last, I don't know, probably almost a year, there's been kind of a drumbeat in the media and from conservative voices, and then there's kind of a radical counter drumbeat, that we're seeing, from the river to the sea, and sort of all this stuff going on campus. But then there's kind of like another drumbeat that where you have people who are, Doctors Without Borders who are serving in Gaza. You have um, you know contractors like Tucker Carlson just recently interviewed. I think his name is Tony Aguilar, who was a contractor for a nonprofit in Gaza, and he had some very, very disturbing things to share. There was a nun who was interviewed that um, had lived in Gaza for the last 30, American nun for the last 30 years, and had some, again, firsthand accounts of life over in Israel and in Gaza, and just that whole region. And what I've learned through COVID is that when you see when you see when you see a narrative, and then you see another narrative coming up, and all of a sudden there are loud angry voices pouncing on that alternative narrative and denouncing and name calling, that's when you know that truth was just being spoken.
yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's exactly, that's what we saw during COVID, when you had all, the Great Barrington Declaration, and all those doctors were canceled, and you know all these amazing people that in at any other time, just days prior to COVID, were highly respected and running hospitals, and were sought out experts. All of a sudden they know nothing, and they're useless, and they're
Mhm.
whatever, the worst of the worst. I'm seeing that again with sort of this Gaza Israel conversation, where if anybody says anything that's not sort of worshiping at the altar of Israel, all of a sudden those people are, anti-Semites and are uninformed and are haters and are this and that. It's like, whoa, now you've got my attention.
Right. Hmm.
That
Yeah.
tells me that there's something going on there that you don't want me to know. You don't
Hmm.
want me to investigate, and that's what the Dems do all the time too, right? I mean, anybody who's got a counter narrative that they are super invested in,
Hmm.
they're going to attack
Hmm.
when they're challenged, and
Yeah.
they're get all their little soldiers in line,
Mhm.
just like what's happening in DC, you
Yeah.
know, lying about or they were lying statistics. Trump sends in the National Guard and all these other people, and look how he's even got military judges. He's got JAGs stepping,
Hmm.
to fill those empty spots that are now, there's empty spots because all these, corrupt and incompetent, people have been um, let go. And so he's filling those, that backlog with JAG, and they're telling the truth. They're getting people off the streets, and
Yeah.
this, this whining and crying that's going on about, I don't know. We can't have military people on the streets. Well, damn straight we can have military people on. If somebody's going to carry an AK down the street, I want it to be one of our guys. I
Well,
don't want to be a gangbanger. I don't, I mean, like it's
well,
ridiculous.
well, the hilarious thing about, and this goes back to that evidence-based reasoning thing, and this is why it's so good to know history, number one, and number two, to think for yourself and be able to look at the facts yourself, and not be too married to any one thing, but be willing to look at it. So, when have we seen federal troops in the past? Well, we had federal troops that escorted those 9 children to school in Arkansas back in the late 50s, because the governor of Arkansas wouldn't let black kids go to school. We had that. We had the federal troops. I want to say it was Alabama, when they would let when the governor wouldn't let blacks attend the University of Alabama. Federal troops did that. We didn't seem to have a problem with that, right? So we have a history of bringing federal troops in to fix problems when they need to be fixed. This is no different. So that argument really holds no water, particularly in the case of Washington, D.C., where
Right.
it is the District of Columbia. They have 100% the right to do that. And clearly, it needs to be done given the level of crime we see in Washington, D.C. Now, it'll be very, very interesting to see. I mean, a thinking person would look at that and say, okay, we just set the stage for proving that crime in big blue cities is fixable. It's not something that can't be fixed. We just saw it drop massively in what, 2 weeks, just by bringing federal troops in to fix it. Because if you can fix something that fast, that means that the people in power there weren't interested in fixing it. Just like we saw with the border, we were told for 4 years that the border thing was unfixable. Trump's and a new administration comes in and it's fixed in what, a month? It's just, do you have the will, the desire to take the steps necessary to fix it? And if you look at Baltimore, Portland, Seattle, Washington, Washington D.C., San Francisco, L.A., Detroit, St. Louis, you go across the country, those places are like that because the people in power aren't interested in fixing it or unwilling to spend the political capital necessary to fix it. It's fixable. Do you want to fix it? And the motives for that, that's a whole nother, conversation. But these things are fixable. And it'll be very interesting to see what happens when enough people in DC, and I think this is happening already, they like this new city. They like that they can go to the park. They like that they can walk outside at night. They can go to the grocery store. They don't have to worry about the daughter getting knocked over the side of the head or their wife getting carjacked on the way. People like not having that. When you think about personal safety, what could be more personal than having somebody put a gun in your face? Now, I don't know if any of you on the audience have ever had that happen. I mean, I've never had that happen. I've worked with people who had it happen, though. I used to work at a KFC in central LA behind bulletproof glass. And every person in my store told me that they had a gun in their face at some point. Um, that's a pretty stunning thing to think. Every single person that worked for me had had a gun in their face. Imagine what it would be like. Imagine how you would feel to wake up one day and not have to worry about that. That's personal. And people are going to respond positively to that. and they have friends and relatives in these other cities that they're going to be on the phone talking to right now saying, oh, we want some troops in like Chicago. We want some troops in Portland, Seattle, San Diego. And the national press is never going to tell you that, but I guarantee you that's going on.
Well, and think about once we get behind or beyond this this sort of trauma that we're in trauma triage right now, where we're dealing with rampant crime, um, and then once we get beyond that, and next thing you know, you've got a little market opening up that needs to employ a couple folks. You've got teachers that are going to move into the city who are actually qualified and are going to make an impact in your kid's life. You've got property values that are increasing. You've got, an Amazon maybe opening up a distribution warehouse. Like, I mean, the fact that it's degraded to such a low level that people literally just can't walk down the streets, and you talk about a two-class system, right? I mean, here you've got these lobbyists and you've got, Congress people that are living high on the hog and, getting everything that they want and fancy benefits and big fat paychecks and car service and, housing allowance. And, they're not feeling any of the pain of this place. They're in and out, they're going back to, some little town, some little safe town, right? Where they came from. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be like I said, we're in like trauma triage right now, but once we get through that and then their lives really start to improve, they're going to realize, oh my gosh, I didn't see how terrible our schools were. Oh my gosh, I didn't even think about opening up a local grocery store, but Myrna just did it. Now I'm going to do it. I'm going to open up a nail salon. I'm going to open, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
all of a sudden that American spirit is going to be rekindled. They're going to remember who they are and what they really want their communities to be, because there's going to be hope.
Well, you get used to living in third world conditions. You become accustomed to not going out at night. You become accustomed to your kid's school being super trash. You become accustomed to, I can't use the park because there's too many needles on the ground. You get accustomed to going, and I've seen this in Portland, for example. You have hordes of people scouring the field before the kids' soccer game to make sure that there's no needles on the ground. So when they play, they don't step on needles, right? You get accustomed to this kind of stuff and becomes your new norm. Whereas not even like 10 or 15, 20 years ago, you never had to do that stuff. So getting people to see that, oh, this is not the norm. We don't have to live like this. And that's a great thing. But I think we'd be remiss if we didn't switch gears real quick, Leslie, and talk about this school shooting that just occurred,
Yeah.
because I'm sure that's top of mind for everybody out there. I literally just caught a few minutes of it early this morning and then late this afternoon. It's obviously a pretty horrific thing. What can you say? Catholic school, once again, Catholic church targeted. And I think basically the target is Christianity, as usual with these Marxist types, and shot the place up. In terms of the shooter, and I just learned a little bit about the person, it was let's see, I think it was a guy named Robert who changed his name to Robin. You can see where this is going already. It was another one of these transgender types, which this isn't the first time that's happened. So that's what we have so far.
Yeah, I mean, I was going online and I was trying to find out, because the last several school shooters I've read have been transgender. And so, again, you go into Google and I was typing in, transgender shooters, how many school shooters have been transgender, blah, blah, blah. And of course, the search assistant little AI, is tamping down any assumption that,
Of course.
it's like, just the freaking facts. Just show me the numbers, no.
Mhm.
So yeah, but it is true that this has been a major issue, and it's not surprising. These people are unstable. They're angry. They're unstable. They're on drugs.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And one of the things that we're not supposed to talk about is the fact that these people have a mental disorder. Um, And this is why they don't like you to talk about it. See, in the national press, they're already, from what little I've seen already, they're already trying to minimize that, to not let you know who it is, not let you know what their background is. But the reality is, this is what's occurring, and along with that, we haven't heard anything about this particular one's background. But in every other one of these school shootings I've seen, this person comes from like a destroyed family background. If there is rarely a dad in the picture, and if he is in the picture, then he's abusive as all get out. But mostly it's some just train wrecked family. So there it is, right?
And then they kill themselves afterwards.
Right,
So,
right. Hmm.
I mean, again, it's totally cowardly. If you really believe in what you're doing, stand tall. Proclaim it loudly. But no, they're just cowards to the very end. I mean,
Yeah.
it saves us time and money, but it's just,
What is the cost they dole out to the rest of society on the way off this mortal coil, right? So if you just feel for the families of the victims, I think there was a couple of little kids that got killed,
yeah,
uh, like under 10 years old,
yeah,
in this whole melee.
yeah,
Uh, but and what the left learns to talk about is getting the root causes. Well, let's get to root causes. What's causing? You first have to create the profile. Who's doing this? Number one, and then why are they doing it? And then you have to address that.
right.
And for us, I think with this, the first thing is the destruction of the family.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this the left wants no part of.
Yeah, it's the destruction of the family, and that leads to destruction of the individuals. It's a personal attack. If you don't have a family, if you don't have, a framework that loves you, that helps you navigate and identify who you are,
Mhm.
then you don't know who you are. And
Yeah.
like in this case, I guess I'm a woman. I'm not a man.
Mhm.
Like, and then I'm gonna go hate people. I just it's yeah,
At the end, it's like a scream for love and attention. Now, I'm no psychologist, but this is just based on my experience. I could be wrong. I'm just going to toss this out there. But you take a look at what family is. It's the vehicle that we use, the best vehicle that we have to civilize people. When a baby gets here, the baby's uncivilized, meaning they only care about themselves. Like they're basically, that's the definition of a savage to me, right? They only care about themselves. The objective is to get them to the point where by the time they're grown, they only care about other people, which would be the definition of a saint. No greater love for a man can have that he be willing to die for his friend, right? That's like the height of what you can be from a moral perspective. Very few of us are going to reach that. But if you at least reach the point where you think about others before you take actions, that's the goal. We know the best vehicle for teaching that is a mother and a father raising a kid, loving a kid, and those parents partnering with the church to help them instill the moral code in that person so that when they grow up, they can go out in the world and be a positive benefit to the world. Whenever that vehicle has been disrupted or destroyed, chaos has resulted. A classic example is you look at the Black family. Since LBJ's destruction of the family with his welfare war on poverty, which was really a war on Black people that he put in place in the 60s, we went from what, roughly 20% illegitimacy to now we're up to like 85% in central cities. And what do you see? You see Black men, young Black men, just running wild. It's I think something like 90%. I think it's in prisons, like 90% of men in prisons don't have dads. What does that tell you, right? So that's the cause of the problem. And I didn't even talk about the destruction it causes to the women who are raised in those situations without a dad around. So that, if you want to talk about core things to fix, that's the core. If you're going to fix it, you got to go back to basics and fix that. But those are things the left is not interested in doing.
no, no. Well, the more chaos that they can create, the more that people need people with the answers, and they like to be able to create the chaos so that they can then step in,
Mhm.
be the ones with the answers. And I mean, it's just, yeah, it's just narcissism and control.
Yeah, it's wild. But by talking about this and having these conversations, this is the beginning of solving the problem. And I think we're beginning to turn the ship around because we're having these kinds of conversations, which 2 or 3 years ago you couldn't have because the objective of the radical left was to shut down any conversations, any debate. They want to tell you what to do, and that's the end of it. And so, I feel pretty good about the fact that these kinds of conversations are happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I do too. I wish that, Republicans would spend more time focusing on these issues that we can all agree on. Tearing each other down about stupid things, like we're not, yeah. I mean, we're not gonna get where we need to get. I mean, right now, Trump and his cabinet is driving all the goodness. And Republicans in Congress are just being, obstructionists. I just, yeah. We see it nationally, we see it locally. It's like, come on, don't we have enough problems? Like, why are you eating your own? Just get in line and follow the agenda, and then worry about these minor issues. Like, are we having filet mignon or baked chicken tonight? Let's worry about the side dish, like, the grocery store and decide what we're having.
And we're always going to have a certain percentage of that. That's just the nature of the beast. Remember, the rhinos aren't gone just because Trump won. We still have a huge percentage of them around. These are the grifters who are they look at this as just a government job. They lick their thumb, stick it out the window, see which way the wind blows, and that's the way they vote. We're going to have, and we still have a significant portion of those. And the message to people like that is basically, we'll run you out of office whenever the next election rolls around. If you're not voting, we're going to remember. This is what Democrats do to their own all the time, by the way.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, so when the next election rolls around, we're going to remember that. We're going to put up a really good candidate, and we're going to get rid of you. That's how you win. We have been playing softball while the other side has been playing hardball this entire time. I think one of the things that makes me most excited, I was never one of these people who was bothered by Trump's lack of civility, if you will, right? I welcomed it because we had too many people like McCain, like Romney, like Dole, always trying to be nice and getting just their teeth kicked in by the other side. So we finally have somebody who's a brawler. And I think that's what you need a brawler. And all, if you go back and you look at like Winston Churchill, for example, the dude was a brawler and he didn't mind getting in there and just slinging hay. And that's how you win. It's like we talk about being in the trenches in football. If you're down in the trenches, offensive line, defensive line, there's nothing polite going on in the trenches.
Yeah, right? I agree 100%. I mean, being the president of our country is, you're bare knuckling it. And so I need you to get in there because we're all getting in there. Right. We're doing our damnedest to raise families and, have, earn an income that, keeps up with, the cost of living wherever we are. And, we're sacrificing and, we're suffering and we're doing the work. We're doing the work, and sometimes it's beautiful, but sometimes it's ugly. I need a leader who's going to be doing that too. I don't want somebody who's flying around on Air Force One and, got, some wardrobe budget and, all the best of the best and the best food, like, enough already. Like, I need you to work for me. I need you to be making my life better. And I agree with you. I could care less what comes out of Trump's mouth. I care about what he does.
Right. Yeah. Are you executing the principles that are necessary to be successful? And I'll tell you, here's another one like these tariffs. Will I see part of that cabinet? So we've, if I get this wrong, I think we're on track to earn like something like 2 or 3 trillion in tariffs this year.
Yeah.
That's like insane. Now, they were telling us there's no way. 30 trillion. Think about this for a minute. I got to do a write on this eventually. We're 30 trillion in the hole. That's with a T. 30 trillion. That's what the left has done to us. And that looks like something, a hole you'd never get out of. What Trump is proving is, yeah, we can get out of that hole. If you can get 3 trillion just from tariffs in the first 6 or 8 months, I think we just figured out how to get out of the hole. A, stop spending, get rid of all these useless government employees, and B, let the other countries pay us back for the way they've screwed us for the last 30 or 40 years. I think is like freaking awesome. And there is, whenever there's a problem, there's a solution. You just have to be willing to put in place the steps necessary to get to the solution.
That's right. That's
always the optimist. I think there's a solution to every problem. It's just, are you willing to pay the price to fix the problem?
That's right. There are no sacred cows. You need to think about everything. I mean, when you're putting together your family budget, everything's on the table. You're for every stone. If something needs to be paid for, you have a major medical bill, or you need a brand new car when you weren't expecting it. Everything's on the table. Somebody gets a second job. You quit
Mhm.
funding your 529, or you reduce your 401k contributions. Like, you do it. You cancel a vacation.
Yeah,
Everything is considered.
yeah,
And it's not just the Democrats. I mean, it's the Republicans too. They've all
yeah,
been together.
yeah.
And one side likes to spend a little bit more, but the other one kind of just pays lip service.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Now here's an interesting number I saw, and I got to write this up because I don't have these facts exactly right, but you'll get the concept. I can't remember the economist who did this study, but basically they studied this: when your national debt reaches the point where the service of the debt is more than your defense budget for the year, every country in history, going back to the time of antiquity, that has gotten to that situation has collapsed, right? And so, for the first time in history, I think last year, we reached that point where the amount of interest payments on the debt exceeded our entire defense budget. And I can't remember what those exact numbers are,
hmm.
but that's where the Democrats put us. Which, of course, I believe if you look at the Davos crowd, I'll call it the One World Order crowd. Their objective is to collapse the United States so they can rule everything from one spot. So again, this is a bigger scope than we have for this particular discussion, but it all makes sense. There's no reason for us to be doing this. And one of the things I love the most about what Trump is doing is he's proven that, yes, we can get rid of that debt and we don't have to strangle ourselves to death to do it. We can make other countries pay us. We're the greatest buyers, and we buy stuff. That's what America's famous for. You want to sell your stuff, then you got to pay. You got to pay for the right to do that. And this that business person's way of looking at it has transformed the whole conversation. We weren't even having this conversation, 10 years ago. But suddenly here we are having this conversation, and and we're rebuilding our middle class, and we're rebuilding our industrial base, and we're rebuilding those jobs where people work with their hands. We build our own stuff, which is a national defense issue as well, all at the same time. I can't think of a time when I've been more excited about what the administration is doing since the Reagan administration. This is like incredible, and it's probably even better than that.
Oh, this is so far beyond, Don. I mean, it's so far beyond. And Reagan had 8 years. I mean,
Right. Mhm.
consecutive years. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
This is absolutely incredible. But if you're making a comparison, but at that time, the radical left hadn't punched us in the face like they had the last. And who knows what Reagan would have done if he was faced with this? But this has been they've been able to grow this infection inside us for the last 40 years that we didn't really see what it was until they destroyed the election 4 years, 8 years ago, whatever that was, 2020. It's been 4 years. Destroyed the election and then launched this whole COVID madness on us. That they would do what they did. I walked around for months thinking, is this really happening? I mean, it's literally George Orwell come alive, and people can't see that. It's already been written. We already know what it looks like. It's already been done, and people can't see it. That was the shocker for me, that people couldn't see what was happening right before the eyes. Your government's going to tell you to take a shot, an untested drug. You don't even know what it is. There's no liability for it if it doesn't work. They're going to pay you to take it. If you don't take it, you're going to get fired. We have military people getting kicked out of their jobs and getting replaced by people who are less than competent. Air traffic controllers, people that fly airplanes. I mean, what more dangerous thing can you do than remove that experience space away? It's like insane, but that's what they did to us. So at that point, we're at war. They were at war.
They were counting on so many sheeple that would go along with it, or who had been bought off so that they would continue to endorse it and coerce others. And that's exactly what happened. They perfected their ground game. They spent years and years and years getting ready for this, and
Mhm.
did and tested and tested and tested, and we kept going for it.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, and the thing is that it ain't over yet. For the like I think I mentioned this the last time we talked. That we're excited about the progress we've made, but really it's the beginning of the third quarter. we're down 35-0, and we just got our first down. That's just, maybe it's a little better than that. We've proven we can advance the ball for the first time in like 40 years, right? And we should be thrilled about that, but we can't rest on our laurels. We got to continue to like push the ball down the field,
Right.
and know that the enemy. There's nothing more dangerous than a wounded animal, right? And that's what we have right now. Is we've got a wounded animal. Um, but it's one thing I think before we let the time go by that we really need to talk about just a little bit because I think it's so interesting, and that's this thing about infant death mortality. Just saw this article. Let's see, Time Magazine, actually amazing. Infant deaths spur public health emergency in Mississippi. This is absolutely fascinating. So scientists are baffled, shocked, surprised. In Mississippi, nearly 10 babies for every 1,000, double the national average, are dying. The infant mortality in 24 states between 2023 and 2024 worsened in 24 different states. This is reflective, says this writer, of a larger trend. But they never mention what could possibly be the cause. What has changed in 2023 and 24 that would cause this sudden spike in infant mortality? It's like mind blowing. And here's a quote from a guy from Baylor. This is a doctor at Baylor University who says, him and other experts are talking about the importance of getting a COVID vaccine while pregnant. Are these people out of their mind? And they're out of their mind.
But here's the thing. The readers read that and go, okay. I mean, right? I mean,
yeah.
They can be blatant because there are so many dum-dums out there who still buy that paper and read that article and believe whatever narrative they want to give them. Nobody questions.
Yeah.
I mean, more people are questioning now.
Yeah.
Sure, you have friends like I have friends, close friends, who vaccinated their kids. We have a friend in common and vaccinated and their kids, and they won't read the stuff because they know that it's bad. And they can't take themselves to that place where they would feel so much guilt. And then there's a whole group of other people who are still in the dark.
Oh, I tell you, and I feel really badly for people who are in that soup where that the cognitive dissonance you must feel from knowing that you forced your kid or you allowed them to be vaxxed, and then you find out later that you were bamboozled, basically, and that either A, they might get sick downstream because of it, or B, they already are sick because of it, and there's a whole bunch of people who fall into that bucket. Or worst case scenario, of course, C, you've lost your kids because of it, and there's a whole bunch of people in that bucket as well. And the sad part about it is, like with most things, people who aren't willing to think, people who are willing to be led by the nose, they pay the price in terms of what actually happens to them. So, and that's how they learn. Unfortunately, the experience is the best teacher, but it's also the hardest taskmaster, if you will. And now, and I'm sure you're in the same bucket as me, I know lots of people who have died, and it's almost certain as a result of taking that thing, or who are sick all the time, almost certain as a result of that thing. Nothing else really explains it. And young people who are sickly all the time, and I'm almost certain because of that. Those studies will eventually come out, and more people are realizing this on their own. And that's, if there's a silver lining in all this, that's the good news. People are figuring it out the hard way.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that they're able to see the truth and that they're not just kind of like, oh, I mean, again, not to beat a dead horse, but like when, people were so, freedom lovers were awake and were fighting the whole COVID vaccine thing and just all the lies. And the next thing everybody's got, let's quick pivot. And Ukraine is the new issue of the day. And let's go Ukraine, change our profile, avatar. And the next, it's like Israel is the new poster child for greatness. Like boom, 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 and they forget. And people that like you were awake for COVID, but now you're asleep for Ukraine, or or a sleep for Biden or a sleep for whatever it is, like
Mhm.
why do I have to learn? Why do I have to suffer because you can't freaking learn? Like I got it. I only need to walk into a door once. There's up there of the butterflies and the shells, and I'm going to prevent myself from walking into that glass door again. But
Well, one of the, last thing I tell you, one of the most enlightening things that came for me out of all of this stuff, because I would get up early in the morning and do some meditation and think of these things, right? And one of the things that hit me, if you take a look at the biblical adage around we're called upon to evangelize others, right? That's what we're called upon to do as Christians. Most of us don't do it. To be blunt, it's a hard thing to do. Let's face it, we don't do it. But if we don't do it, and enough of our fellow citizens go off the wagon, it will eventually come back to bite us.
yeah,
Now, there's the secular reason why we need to do it. Because if we don't do it, pretty soon you have neighbors who are doing all kinds of crazy stuff, and that will eventually affect you. So now you wind up having to have alarms on your house, cameras on your house, got to be home before it's dark, got to arm yourself. Um, that's because us Christians have not done our job. If enough people are out there, you might say to yourself, "Hey, if Johnny down the street wants to have like, 4 babies by 3 or 4 different women, doesn't affect me." Actually, it does, right? It might take a while, but
because
what happens is,
and you've got this weird health clinic down the street, Planned Parenthood, and you've got like it degrades the whole society.
yeah, there, as my wife likes to say, there is no private sin. And I think that's 100% true. So our lives are not our own. And that's one of the big fallacies that came out of the leftism out of the 60s. Do your own thing, do what feels good, don't hold back, all that stuff. That's great, but our lives are not our own because whatever we do affects others. So if you go out there and do this thing and have women all over town, taxpayers will end up having to pay for that, to support the kid, through welfare or whatever it is. Kid winds up going to jail because there's no dad around. You get to pay for that. Your kid or grandkid winds up in a car accident by a drunk driver, and one of them gets killed because of that. You can't put the genie. It's very difficult to put that genie in the bottle. Once it's out, and it all goes back to, at the end of the day, we have not evangelized our fellow citizen. We have not corrected the person who's doing the wrong thing. We've not done those things, and we've allowed our society kind of spin out of control. We could blame our religious leadership for that too, because they've been horrible over the last 40 years. Um, Everybody's too kind. Everybody's afraid to hurt somebody else's feelings. Um, but at the end of the day, there's certain things that there's objective right and wrong. And if you do these wrongs, it's not just you, you're hurting all of us. And it's up to us to say so. Because if we don't, we wind up with cities like Baltimore, New York, Portland, right? Or the kid that goes and shoots up a school that we just saw.
That's right. No, I agree with you 100%. I used to listen to John MacArthur,
Mhm.
who just recently
Yeah,
passed. But I
right.
mean, man who I actually had a good friend whose family
Mhm.
attended his church, and they had one of the kids in their family was not making choices that were biblically based, and John MacArthur called that person out and told them to leave the church until they got their life together, and it was very embarrassing for this family, but they continued to believe and to be members of the church because it was what he did was biblical. I
Yeah.
mean,
Mhm.
and that's missing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's loving.
Mhm.
It's not loving and compassionate to allow somebody down the wrong road that's going to lead to destruction.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
not loving at all.
Mhm.
And you really, yeah, you have to call out, and it's not judgmental and it's not intolerant. It's saving somebody.
Sure. Yeah, and life has to have consequences. And like with kids, if you don't provide them with consequences, you might delay the negative impact that they feel for what they do, but eventually it will catch up with them. And you see this all the time to use like the entertainment world or the Hollywood types. A lot of these people, I'll just use young athletes, for example, they've never had anybody correct them because they're stars or whatever. Then they grow up and they find at some point you're going to run into that. But by the time you grow up and run into that, now it's prison or now it's death. Whereas before, it might have been, you got to sit out the game, or you don't get to play this season, or you don't get this treat for the week or whatever, right? But because everybody kept letting them get by without any correction, their crimes get worse and worse and worse, and finally it destroys them.
Yeah.
So we're not doing them any favors by doing that.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so anyway, well, my friend, it's 6:58. We did it again in a night when we didn't think we had much to cover. How does this happen?
Here, Daddy Don, that's what happens.
Yes, exactly. Well, audience, thank you all so much for joining us once again. It was indeed a wonderful Wednesday. I enjoyed this very much. Hope you all enjoyed it as well. Leslie, any final closing comments here?
No, I just, I'm just having a great time, and I'm just really grateful that Dawn invited me to participate in the conversation. And I hope that I hope I'm keeping up.
You are more than keeping up, my friend. Thank you so much for joining in. I love it. All right. Go America. And we'll see y'all next week.
All right.
Good
Bye.
night, everybody.